I never wanted this job. Let's start there. Nobody grows up dreaming of being a garbage collector. But life has a funny way of chewing you up and spitting you into places you never thought you'd end up. For me, that place was a crumbling one-bedroom apartment at the edge of town, where the radiator wheezes like it's dying and the smell of mildew never quite goes away. From my single drafty window, I have a perfect view of the alley out back, a narrow, grimy strip lined with dumpsters and old brick walls stained black from years of neglect. That window has become my world lately. I work the graveyard shift. Just me, a beat-up truck, and an endless cycle of trash bags filled with the refuse of other people's lives. I'm not complaining. It pays the bills barely, but it leaves me feeling hollow most nights. And lately, I've developed a habit. Whenever I get home, I sit in my worn-out recliner, crack open a beer, and stare out that window. I don't even know why. Maybe it's the stillness of the alley at night. Maybe it's the faint hum of the street lamp flickering down below. Or maybe it's because there's nothing else to do when you've got no one waiting for you on the other side of the door. It was during one of those late-night vigils that I first noticed him. At first, I didn't think much of it. Just a shadowy figure at the dumpster below my building, hunched over as they rifled through the trash. Happens all the time. Homeless people scavenging for cans, old food, whatever they can find. But something about this guy was different. It wasn't just how he moved, slow, deliberate, like he was searching for something specific. It was the way he carried himself. Most people digging through the garbage are desperate, their movements frantic, their heads darting up every few seconds to check for prying eyes. Not this guy. He was calm, methodical. His gloved hands sifted through the trash like he was sorting through library books. And the way he stood, tall and straight, his hood pulled low over his face. It was almost purposeful, like he wasn't scavenging, like he belonged there. I told myself it didn't matter. Whoever he was, whatever he was doing, it wasn't my business. But I couldn't stop watching him. There was something magnetic about the way he moved, something that made it impossible to look away. He spent a good 10 minutes at the dumpster that night before slipping away into the shadows without taking a single thing. Weird, right? But not weird enough to lose sleep over. The next night he was back. Same hood, same gloves, same methodical movements. I watched from my recliner, telling myself again that it didn't matter, that I should just go to bed. But deep down, I knew I'd stay until he was gone. And just like the night before, he sifted through the trash for what felt like forever, then disappeared without a sound. By the third night, I started feeling uneasy. It wasn't just that he kept coming back. It was that nothing about him ever changed. Same clothes, same movements, same eerie calm, like he was stuck on repeat. And no matter how hard I squinted through the grimy glass of my window, I could never get a good look at his face. The hood always hung, just low enough to keep it hidden. That night, I made a mistake. I watched him longer than I should have. I don't know what compelled me to do it. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Maybe I just wanted to know what he was looking for. But whatever the reason, I found myself leaning forward in my chair, my breath fogging up the glass as I strained to see more. And that's when it happened. He stopped. Not like he'd found something or decided to leave. No, he stopped because he knew I was watching him. His gloved hands froze mid-sift, and he tilted his head slightly, like a dog hearing a sound it doesn't quite recognize. My heart thudded in my chest. I told myself to back away, to pull the curtains, to do something. But I didn't. I just sat there, frozen, as he slowly straightened up to his full height. Then he looked at me. I swear to God, I felt it before I even saw it. That prickling sensation you get when someone's eyes are boring into you. And when I finally locked eyes with him, it was like the rest of the world fell away. His face was still mostly obscured by the hood, but I could see just enough to know that something wasn't right. His eyes, or what I think were his eyes, were black. Not just dark. Black. Hollow. Empty. The kind of empty that makes you feel like you're falling. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared, and I couldn't look away. My pulse hammered in my ears. I told myself to get up, to walk away, to do anything but sit there like an idiot. But it was like I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by that stare. Time seemed to stretch out, each second feeling like an eternity. Then, without warning, he was gone. I don't mean he walked away. I mean he disappeared. One second he was there, and the next the space beneath the street lamp was empty. My hands were shaking when I finally pried myself out of the chair. I stumbled to the window, half expecting to see him lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing, no sign that he'd ever been there. I didn't sleep that night. I told myself it was all in my head, that I'd imagined the way he stared at me, that the way he moved, the way he vanished, could be explained away if I just thought about it hard enough. But deep down, I knew better. Something wasn't right about him, and somehow, I knew this wasn't over. The box was small enough to fit in my hand, but it felt heavier than it should have. I found it on my doorstep 3 days after the figure had stared at me from the dumpster. I wasn't expecting mail. I never get mail unless you count overdue bills, and I certainly hadn't ordered anything. At first, I thought it might have been left there by mistake. Some neighbor's delivery gone to the wrong door. But the longer I stared at it, the more I realized something was wrong. The box was damp, for one, not like it had been left in the rain, but like whatever was inside had soaked through the cardboard. Dark, wet spots stained the corners, and the smell. God, the smell. Even before I bent down to pick it up, I could tell something was rotting in there. My gut told me to leave it alone, walk away, toss it into the dumpster out back, and forget it ever existed. But curiosity, or maybe something worse, got the better of me. I carried the box into my apartment, holding it at arm's length like it might explode. The smell grew stronger the closer I got to my kitchen, a sickly sweet stench that made my stomach churn. I set the box on the counter and just stared at it for a while, trying to convince myself to open it. I shouldn't have, but I did. The tape was loose, like it had been applied half-heartedly, and the cardboard practically fell apart under my fingers. When the flaps opened, I took a single look inside and immediately stumbled back, gagging. It was a hand, a human hand, severed at the wrist, pale and bloated with decay. The skin was peeling back in places, exposing slimy, gray flesh beneath. One of the fingers was bent at an impossible angle, the bone clearly broken. And crawling across the back of the hand was a single, fat maggot, writhing lazily in the dim kitchen light. The smell was unbearable. I clamped a hand over my mouth, breathing shallowly through my fingers, and forced myself to look again. That's when I noticed the tattoo. It was faint, etched into the inside of the wrist, just above where the hand had been severed. A strange, looping symbol, almost like an infinity sign, but with jagged edges and a dot in the center. It didn't look familiar, definitely not something you'd find in a tattoo parlor. It reminded me of the kind of symbols you see carved into old trees or scrawled on the walls of abandoned buildings. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that hand. Time felt slippery, unreal. My thoughts were racing, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Who would leave something like this? And why? For a moment, I thought about calling the cops. But what would I even tell them? Hi, yes. Someone left a severed hand on my doorstep, and I think it's connected to the weird garbage man who's been staring at me. Yeah, that'd go over well. Instead, I did what I always do when I don't know how to handle something. I cleaned. I grabbed the plastic grocery bag, scooped up the box and its horrifying contents, and tied the bag shut as tight as I could. Then I carried it down to the dumpster out back, my stomach churning the entire way. The alley was quiet, the flickering street lamp casting long, jagged shadows across the brick walls. I tossed the bag into the dumpster without looking back, wiped my hands on my jeans, and hurried back upstairs. I told myself it was just a prank, some sick joke played by kids in the building or one of the guys from work. I told myself it wasn't real, that the hand was fake, that the maggot was a plastic toy, that the tattoo was drawn on with marker. I told myself a lot of things, but deep down I knew none of it was true. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the box. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hand. That pale, peeling skin, the twisted fingers, the maggot writhing in its flesh. I kept seeing the symbol too, burn into my mind like it had been etched there alongside the tattoo. By the time the sun went down, I knew I wouldn't be getting any sleep. So I did the one thing I've been avoiding since the night I saw him. I went back to the window. It was stupid, I know, but I had to look. I had to know if he was still out there, lurking in the shadows, watching me. I pulled back the curtain slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. At first, I didn't see anything. Just the empty alley, bathed in the sickly glow of the flickering street lamp. The dumpsters were lined up neatly against the brick wall, just as I'd left them. But then, my eyes caught movement. He was there, standing directly under the street lamp, perfectly still, his hooded face tilted up toward my window. I froze, my fingers gripping the edge of the curtain so tightly I thought they might snap off. I wanted to move, to step back, to hide, but I couldn't. I was stuck just like I'd been the first time I saw him. And then, slowly, he reached up and pulled back his hood. I wish he hadn't. His face was pale and gaunt. The skin stretched so tightly over his skull that it looked ready to split. His cheeks were hollow, his lips thin and colorless, but it was his eyes that terrified me the most. They were black, not just dark, black. Empty pits that seemed to swallow the light around them. Looking into them was like staring into a bottomless void, like standing at the edge of a cliff and feeling yourself start to fall. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, staring at me with those empty eyes. The seconds dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. My chest was tight, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I thought about closing the curtain, but my hands wouldn't obey me. It was like he'd frozen me in place with that stare, trapping me in some invisible grip. And then, just as suddenly as he'd appeared, he was gone. I don't mean he walked away. I mean 1 second he was there, and the next the space beneath the street lamp was empty. My knees buckled, and I stumbled back from the window, gasping for air. The room felt too small, too quiet, like the walls were closing in around me. I didn't sleep that night either. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I started to wonder if I'd made a mistake. Because whatever was happening, whatever he was, it wasn't going to stop. Not until it had me. Days passed without a sign of him. I told myself it was over. Whatever had happened, whatever he was, it was done. People like me don't attract attention. I'm no one. Just another cog in the city's grinding machine, forgotten by everyone, living paycheck to paycheck in a crappy apartment no one would ever think twice about. He'd gotten his sick little thrill by scaring me, and now he'd moved on. At least, that's what I told myself. But I didn't believe it. Not really. Every time I passed the window, I'd catch myself glancing down at the alley. Just a quick look, a reflex. But it was always empty. No sign of the hooded figure. No rotting gifts left at my door. No hollow black eyes staring up at me from the shadows. Just the dumpsters, the cracked pavement, and the flickering streetlight. I should have been relieved, but the silence felt wrong. Like the eye of a storm. Too calm, too still. I stopped sleeping for the most part. Every creak of the floorboards or groan of the radiators set my teeth on edge. I started double-checking the locks on my door, then triple-checking them just to be sure. My own apartment felt like a trap, a cage where something unseen was waiting for the right moment to strike. But the days kept passing, and nothing happened. Eventually, I started convincing myself that maybe, just maybe, I'd imagined the whole thing. Lack of sleep, stress, paranoia. They could mess with your head, right? Maybe the box was just some disgusting prank, and the guy at the dumpster was just a weird, homeless dude with bad timing. By the end of the week, I'd almost convinced myself to believe it. Almost. It was a Tuesday night when everything went to hell. I'd just finished my shift, trudging home through the dimly lit streets with my hands shoved into my jacket pockets. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of rain that hadn't quite fallen yet. My boots slapped against the wet pavement, the sound echoing faintly off the empty buildings. When I turned the corner into the alley behind my apartment, I hesitated. The street lamp was still flickering, casting long, jittery shadows across the dumpsters. I could hear the faint hum of the bulb, the soft buzz blending with the distant roar of traffic from the main road. It felt different tonight. I told myself it was nothing, just my nerves playing tricks on me. I'd been jumpy for days, and for good reason. But now I was home. I was safe. I kept walking, my eyes fixed on the ground. That's when I heard it. The cry. It stopped me dead in my tracks. At first, I thought it was an animal. The sound was faint, muffled, like it was coming from deep inside the dumpster. But then I heard it again, louder this time, and my stomach twisted. It wasn't an animal. It was a person. Help! The voice was small and pitiful, barely audible over the hum of the street lamp. It sounded wrong, though. warped like it was coming through water or a broken speaker. Please help me. My first instinct was to run. Everything about the situation screamed danger. The alley was empty, dark, isolated. No one would hear me if something happened. But there was something about that voice, something desperate, that pulled me in despite my better judgment. I stepped closer to the dumpster, my hands shaking. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. The crying stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, I heard it again. "Found you." The words were soft, barely more than a whisper, but they sent a jolt of cold terror through my body. I stumbled back, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. Before I could move, something grabbed me. A hand, long and skeletal, shot out from the shadows beneath the dumpster and latched onto my wrist. The grip was impossibly strong, the fingers cold and clammy, like they'd been soaking in ice water for hours. I let out a strangled yell, yanking my arm as hard as I could, but the hand wouldn't budge. It started pulling me closer, dragging me toward the dumpster. That's when I saw it. The thing crouched beneath the dumpster wasn't human. It was twisted, elongated, its limbs unnaturally long and thin. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its face, God, its face. The mouth was stretched impossibly wide, the corners splitting into jagged cracks that dripped with some dark, tar-like substance. The teeth were sharp, uneven, and glistening in the dim light. But the eyes were the worst part. They were black, the same hollow, empty black pits as the hooded figures. It let out a low, guttural growl, the sound reverberating through my chest like thunder. Panic surged through me, and with one last desperate pull, I managed to wrench my arm free. I stumbled backward, falling hard onto the pavement, my head spinning. When I looked up, the thing was gone. The space beneath the dumpster was empty, the shadows undisturbed. I didn't wait to catch my breath. I scrambled to my feet and bolted, not stopping until I was inside my apartment with the door locked behind me. My chest heaved as I leaned against the door, trying to calm the frantic pounding of my heart. I looked down at my wrist, expecting to see bruises where the hand had grabbed me. But there was nothing, just cold skin and the faint echo of pressure where the fingers had been. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at the door, listening for the sound of footsteps in the hallway. But the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. I didn't sleep that night. Hell, I didn't even sit down. I just paced the apartment, glancing at the window every few minutes, half expecting to see those black eyes staring back at me. By the time the sun rose, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't done with me, and I wasn't sure I'd survive to find out what it wanted. I think I'm losing my mind. It started after the dumpster incident. I couldn't shake the image of that thing. Its stretched out face, its black, empty eyes, the way its hand had felt so cold and alive as it dragged me toward the dark. Even now, I can feel the phantom pressure on my wrist, like the memory itself is clinging to me. I haven't slept in days. It's not that I haven't tried. I've tried everything. I've downed enough melatonin to knock out a horse, piled blankets over myself to feel safe, even left every single light in the apartment on like a kid afraid of the dark. But every time I close my eyes, I feel like something's watching me. It's not just in my head either. Everywhere I go, I feel it. That oppressive weight of unseen eyes following me, even when the streets are empty. I can't walk to the store without glancing over my shoulder every few steps. Shadows seem to ripple and twitch at the edge of my vision, darting out of sight when I turn to look. And the smell, it's faint but constant. That same sickly sweet stench of decay that wafted out of the box on my doorstep. No matter how much I clean, it won't go away. I've scrubbed every surface in the apartment until my hands bled, dumped half a bottle of bleach down the sink, and even burned candles until the wax ran down the walls. Nothing works. The smell just lingers, clinging to everything like a second skin. At first, I thought it was coming from outside. Maybe the dumpster. Maybe some dead animal rotting away in the alley. But it's not. It's me. It's in me. The first time I noticed the symbol on my door, I thought it was graffiti. It was early morning, if you can call it morning, when you haven't slept all night. I'd been pacing the apartment again, wearing a groove into the floorboards, when I decided to step outside for some air. As soon as I opened the door, I saw it. The symbol. It was carved into the wood, right at eye level. A looping, jagged figure that looked like some warped version of the infinity sign with a small, precise dot in the center. I knew it immediately. It was the same mark I'd seen tattooed on the severed hand. My stomach dropped. I ran my fingers over the carving, half hoping it would rub away, that maybe some bored kid with a pocket knife had done it as a prank. But the grooves were deep, almost like they'd been burned into the door itself. I grabbed a sponge and started scrubbing, then a rag, then a steel bristle brush. Nothing worked. The symbol didn't fade, didn't even smudge. If anything, it looked darker now, the lines standing out like fresh scars against the wood. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands shaking. It didn't make any sense. None of this made sense. But as much as I tried to convince myself otherwise, I knew it wasn't random. This was for me. That night, I heard the knock. It was soft at first, just a gentle tap like someone testing to see if I was home. I froze. For the past several days, I'd lived in constant fear of what might be waiting on the other side of that door. My apartment had become my only refuge, even if it reeked of decay and suffocating paranoia. But now, as the knock came again, louder this time, that fragile sense of safety shattered like glass. I crept toward the door, every nerve in my body screaming at me to stop, to turn back, to hide. But I couldn't. My feet carried me forward, one shaky step at a time, until I was standing inches away from the source of the sound. Another knock. Slow. Deliberate. I pressed my eye to the peephole. He was there. The garbage collector. No hood this time. Just his gaunt, pale face illuminated by the faint glow of the hallway light. His hollow, black eyes stared straight ahead, unblinking, as if he knew I was watching. He was holding the box. The same small, damp box I'd found on my doorstep before. My breath hitched. My chest felt tight, like my lungs had been stuffed with cotton. I wanted to scream, to yell at him to go away, but the words stuck in my throat. He didn't move. He just stood there, motionless, clutching the box in those gloved hands like it was something sacred. I don't know how long I stared at him. It felt like hours. Then, slowly, he turned. He didn't walk away. Not exactly. He drifted, his movements too smooth, too unnatural, as if his feet weren't quite touching the ground. I stayed frozen in place, listening to the faint sound of his steps fade into the distance. When I was certain he was gone, I unlocked the door and flung it open, my heart pounding in my chest. The box was there, sitting on the floor, just like before. I couldn't bring myself to open it. Instead, I grabbed it with both hands, ran to the window, and hurled it into the alley below. I didn't care what was inside. I just wanted it gone. For the rest of the night, I didn't leave the corner of my bedroom. I sat with my back pressed against the wall, clutching a kitchen knife in one hand and my phone in the other. My eyes darted from the door to the window to the shadows that seemed to pulse and shift like living things. I didn't sleep. I didn't blink. I just waited. Waited for the next knock. Waited for whatever was coming for me. It didn't come that night, but the smell stayed. And so did the symbol. No matter what I did, no matter how much I scrubbed or prayed or begged, it stayed. Like a reminder, like a promise. I couldn't take it anymore. The smell, the shadows, the endless feeling of being watched. It was eating me alive. Every second I stayed in that apartment felt like I was being suffocated, my sanity slipping away piece by piece. The symbol on my door stared back at me every time I left, every time I returned, a cruel reminder that I couldn't escape whatever had latched onto me. But the knock at the door, that was the breaking point. I had spent days, weeks, maybe trapped in this nightmare, waiting for him to come back, waiting for him to finish whatever he'd started. But as I sat in my bedroom corner, clutching my knife and shaking with fear, I realized something. This wasn't going to stop. Not unless I stopped it myself. I wasn't going to hide anymore. That night, as the clock struck midnight, I grabbed a flashlight and a hammer from under the sink. My hands were trembling, my throat dry, but I didn't care. I didn't have a plan. Not really, but I knew where I had to go. The dumpster. That alley had been the starting point for all of this. If I was going to end it, That's where I needed to confront him. I slipped on my jacket, shoved the flashlight into my pocket, and headed out into the cold night. The alley was exactly as I'd left it. Quiet, dark, the street lamp casting its sickly yellow light over the cracked pavement. The dumpsters sat in their usual spot, lined up against the brick wall like silent sentinels. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of damp concrete, and something sour lurking underneath. He was there. I saw him as soon as I turned the corner. The garbage collector. He was standing in the same spot as always, directly under the flickering street lamp. No hood this time, just that pale, hollow-eyed face staring straight ahead, his gaunt figure unnervingly still. The hammer felt like a dead weight in my hand, but I gripped it tighter and forced myself to keep walking. My boots echoed loudly in the empty alley, each step a battle against the urge to turn and run. When I was just a few feet away, I stopped. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, though my voice shook with every word. He didn't respond. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the brick walls. Still nothing. I took a step closer, the hammer raised slightly. "Why are you doing this?" "Why me?" Slowly, almost mechanically, he raised one hand. He didn't point at me. He pointed at the dumpster. My blood ran cold. "No," I said, shaking my head. "No way. I'm not." But my words caught in my throat. His black, empty eyes bore into me, and I felt the same crushing weight as before, like an invisible hand was pressing down on my chest, squeezing the air out of my lungs. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I turned to look at the dumpster. "Don't do it," I told myself. "Don't look." But I couldn't stop my feet from moving. The smell hit me before I even reached it. Worse than anything I'd ever encountered. Rot-ball death, it all swirled together into a stench so vile it made my stomach churn. I gagged, pulling my shirt up over my nose, but it didn't help. With one shaky hand, I aimed the flashlight into the dumpster and turned it on. What I saw inside shattered whatever was left of my sanity. Piles of limbs. Human limbs. Arms, legs, hands, feet. All in various states of decay, stacked haphazardly like discarded mannequins. The skin was pale and bloated, some pieces torn and oozing, others blackened with rot. Flies buzzed angrily around the heap, their fat, glistening bodies crawling over exposed flesh. And every single limb had the same tattoo, that jagged, looping symbol with the dot in the center. My knees buckled, and I stumbled back, my flashlight slipping from my grasp and clattering to the ground. But even as it rolled away, its beam caught something at the very top of the pile. My face, my own face, slack-jawed and lifeless, staring back at me with cold, glassy eyes. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, no, no." I tripped over my own feet, falling hard onto the pavement. My breathing was ragged, my vision swimming, but I couldn't look away from the face in the dumpster. My face. When I finally tore my eyes away, he was gone. The garbage collector. He had vanished, just like before, leaving me alone in the alley. Or so I thought. I felt them before I saw them. A presence. I turned my head slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears. They were everywhere. Figures in black hoods, standing in the shadows, lining the alley on both sides. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all silent, all staring at me with those same hollow, black eyes. One by one, they stepped closer, their movements slow and deliberate. My hammer slipped from my grip as panic surged through me. "What do you want?" I screamed, my voice cracking. "What the hell do you want from me?" They didn't answer, but as they moved closer, I heard it. A whisper, soft at first, like a breeze rustling through leaves, but growing louder with every step they took. "It's your turn," they said in unison. The words echoed in my skull, bouncing around like they were trying to burrow into my brain. "It's your turn." Hands, pale, cold, skeletal, grabbed at me from every direction. They pulled at my arms, my legs, my shoulders, dragging me toward the dumpster no matter how hard I struggled. I screamed. I fought, but it didn't matter. The last thing I heard, as their hands dragged me into the darkness, was the same distorted voice I'd heard before, echoing in my mind. "Welcome to the collection." And then, everything went black. Thanks for watching. If you like the story, click like, subscribe to the channel, and write an idea for the next story in the comments.